Final Fantasy 16 was one of my most highly anticipated games of the year, and I got a code off Square Enix, so thank you very much for that. But I'm actually disappointed in the game. I got about 75-80% into the game, and I'm struggling to beat it. I think it does some things well, but other things it just does it mediocre. It's a good step for the franchise, but I think it missed the mark on a lot of the core aspects that it was kind of showing off and, you know, making it look like this was going to be a way better game than it actually was. And yeah, I'm just really disappointed in it because the Final Fantasy franchise hasn't been good for years. I mean, Final Fantasy 7 Remake obviously gave just completely different expectations as to what this series can be, because realistically the series hasn't been good since Final Fantasy 12, 13. I like 13, it's good, but it wasn't amazing. And Final Fantasy 16, from a follow-on from Final Fantasy 15, Final Fantasy 16 is significantly better. But because Final Fantasy 7 Remake was so good that I think Final Fantasy 16 just isn't that great, to be honest. And I guess it's time to talk about why I think it isn't that good. So, of course, the main thing we have to talk about is the combat, because, you know, it's an action... This is completely spoiler-free, by the way. Obviously, they moved to an action combat system. Well, Final Fantasy 15 was also an action game, but like a proper action combat system. It looks flashy, and when I played the demo, the first 2 hours, I was like, oh, this is going to be good. But after about 10, 15 hours, you realize that it's the same thing over and over again. Firstly, how you build your character is really shallow. As you go along, you like take in new icons, and then you can learn to use air abilities, and you can use fire and earth and all this, which is cool. But there's only one core skill tree that has maybe 4 different attacks. So you have R1, that's your light attack, R2, which is your magic attack, and then you have R1 plus R2, which will do a lunge attack, and also a down thrust if you're in the air. And then holding R1 will imbue your weapon with fire. And that's all for sort of the basic attacks. And then on top of that, you can have 3 icons equipped at any time, which have 2 abilities each. So at any given time, you have those handful of core combat abilities that I said, and then you have 6 icon abilities. Well, technically, you get 1 for each class as well, but they're more... The majority of them are ways to close distance. Some of them later on kind of do different things, but at the end of the day, the L2 ability isn't actually too useful. It's definitely the least useful out of all the kit. It can be used to string combos together, but I wouldn't really like include it as a full ability. So the combat is, regardless of what you do, you're going to win. You can engage and do combos, and yes, there are combos, but it's not on the same level as the Devil May Cry that everybody was expecting. But there are combos you can do. You can with the air abilities, you can launch someone up and then use one of the other abilities to combo them mid-air, and then a down thrust. And you know, there is some aerial stuff, but my main issue is that the enemies themselves don't force you to use the abilities. So when you in Final Fantasy 7 Remake, there was certain enemies that were weak to certain abilities that you could stagger. And in this game, they have a stagger meter, but only on the bigger enemies. But all you are doing is spamming abilities to whittle down their stagger meter. You're not actually engaging like, oh, this is like an ice enemy, so if I use my fire abilities, then that will stagger them quicker. There's none of that. And if there is some of that, it's not very well shown, because regardless, I would do the exact same thing. I would go light attack, magic attack to finish the combo, and then just spam through my 6 abilities. And that was with every single combat encounter. Without fail, nothing changed. It was the exact same. I played the game for nearly 30 hours now, and after 5 hours, I've been doing the exact same thing, except I've just had more abilities, but they haven't changed much. So it's just a massive shame from sort of the depth, from a depth standpoint. It's the same thing over and over again. And then, while talking about depth, obviously for Final Fantasy we expect these games to be RPGs, and this game isn't an RPG. It's a straight action game that has a couple of trinkets and gear that you can equip, but they make absolutely no difference whatsoever. Same with the crafting system. Upgrading weapons makes no difference. I would be almost certain I could go through this whole game without having to upgrade anything, and I still would have been fine. Obviously, I would have bought the generic weapons that you can buy as you go along from the different merchants. But like engaging with any combat or any crafting or any trinkets and blah 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 make no difference whatsoever. So that's another there's just no depth to any of the combat. And as time went on, the enemies just seemed to get more health and they got more spongy. So it was literally just smashing R1 and R2 to beat enemies. And it looks good, and it feels good, but it's just that it's so repetitive that the flash can only carry you so much. And the funny thing is, in my Game Explain review, I said I liked this game because I do like it, but I don't think I like it enough to warrant. I think there's probably another 10 hours for me at the very least, maybe 5 to 10 hours to finish this game. And I don't think I will, because it's just the same thing over and over again. And then when you get into the icon battles, which were another massive thing about the game, and I personally don't like when games decide, oh yeah, well, we're going to take you out of the character that you've spent building and learning combos and give you a new character that you can only use, like, I don't know, like icon battles, maybe 2 hours of that. Well, actually, they're quite long, but again, you're just spamming all the abilities, but you don't use them very often. So the icon battles became such a slog. No joke, I just beat an icon battle there, and it took me, I'd say, about 40 minutes. And it's 40 minutes of spamming all the same combos, because the icon, I don't want to say, but the icon that you control has pretty much a similar set of abilities, like R1, R2, and then you get like 2 other abilities that you can use, and you can kind of string them together. But at the end of the day, you're just spamming R1 and R2 and then using your abilities when they're off cooldown, and there's just no finesse with the combat system. And the icon battles go on for way too... All the battles... That's another thing that's kind of stopped me wanting to play this game, is that the battles they're just starting to feel like a slog from now. The normal battles are easy and boring, and the bigger battles are long and spammy, and the enemies have a lot of health and they're not hard. I haven't died in this game once. So, like, the combat, fun, flashy, looks good, and plays well for 5, 8, 10 hours. But anything over that, it just wears down on you over the time, where it just feels like the same thing. And then the story. Now, obviously, this is going to be completely spoiler-free, okay? I have a couple of issues with the story. And, well, I have one major issue with the story, and just the game in general. It's just the pacing. So the big blockbuster moments, the story starts off, it's like they front-loaded the story, okay? So the first 15-ish hours of story is just bam, bam, bam. They don't give you many open areas to explore. They funnel you into these parts of the game where there's cutscenes, there's like cool battles, loads of interaction with all the different characters. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm feeling this story. But then, and this is another thing that I didn't realize when I was playing through, before my Game Explain review, was that when I got to the story after, the 20+ hour mark, it's almost like it was front loaded, where we're going to give you loads of story. And then they got to a part around 20-25 hours where they were like, we could probably wrap this story up in 5 hours. 5, 8, maybe pushing 10 hours. But instead, we're going to just artificially extend the length of the story by giving you these absolutely ridiculous story parts, okay? So, again, no spoilers whatsoever. There was a part of the game, and I'm keeping this as vague as possible, where you were in the hub, the main base, and this was in between big story moments. There was a big story moment, and then there was maybe 2, 3, 4-ish hours, give or take. Again, it probably felt longer than it actually was, but it was at least 2 or 3 hours, but it could have been 4, because that's what it felt like, where there was nothing happening in the story, like absolutely nothing. It was basically, you are in the hub, talk to this guy over here. Okay, I'll talk to him. He gave me 3 minutes of dialogue that I didn't really care about. Walk to the other end over here. Talk to this guy. Okay, I'll talk to him. Okay, now you have to walk to the middle of the hub and talk to this guy. Okay, that's cool. And then go up here and talk to this guy. And then talk to this guy, and then embark on a quest that literally, no joke, was travel to this area that you've already been to, which you can just fast travel to. Go to the town where you have already fast traveled to. Talk to this NPC, get some dialogue about repairing some crap. Okay, go back, talk to someone in the hub. Fine. And then after that, go to a different area and talk to another guy to get something to repair, and then go back. And then talk to another guy. No joke. And it felt like, see, I just got off playing it there. Because I genuinely, I was like, I have to sit down, I have to beat it. And I probably, maybe someday in the future, but I just can't right now. There's too much going on, and I just want to talk about this game. And then I got to, after this big 3-4 hour long section of absolutely nothing happening, I got to this story moment, and it was so cool. It was once again that linear, we're going to funnel you through an area, you're going to fight enemies. Some of the boss fights are going to be very long, because that was the icon battle that I just did that was like 40 minutes long. It was too long. But the story moments that I got, I was like, oh yeah, shit, this is why I like this game. And then I was like, okay, maybe I will be able to beat it, maybe. So then I sat back down, I went out for a walk, sat back down, came back, and then it was the same thing. I got a really cool story moment. And now it's funneling me through some absolutely, go back to the hub, talk to this guy. Okay, now talk to this guy. Okay, now talk to this guy. Okay, now talk to this guy. And then go, and I'm fulfilling requests for people around the world. They're like, I can see where the story is coming to a boil. I just had this massive story moment. And now I just don't know. It's like I'm going back to areas I've already explored to help them with these random requests of like beasts hurting soldiers. And I just don't care. If I could beeline, if I could sum up what I just said in the past 5 minutes, is that everything that I've done, bar that big story moment, in the last 5-6 hours of this game, felt like they should have been optional side quests that I didn't have to do. And any bits of the little dialogue that they gave me that kind of fleshed out the world could have been done in a way more cohesive way, and it could have been delivered to me in a long cutscene, rather than me having to walk to here to talk to this guy to get some exposition, and then walk to here to talk to this guy to get some exposition. And they're just completely padding out the game, so much so that I don't want to beat it. And I don't think I will right now anyway. And it's a shame, because the story itself is pretty good. I think they did a way better job of fleshing out the backstory to the world than they did with Final Fantasy 15, because that was Final Fantasy 15's biggest issue, was that the characters themselves, the 4 characters were good, but the rest of the story around them, like the world building, was just non-existent. Whereas here, they actually seem to have done a good job in the first 10 or 15 hours explaining stuff, especially with the active time lore, which is, if you don't know, if you're in a cutscene, you can pause the game, bring up this thing called the active time lore, and then it gives you little points. So say you're in this kingdom, you can click on it, it'll tell you everything about this kingdom. If you're thinking, oh, who's that character? I haven't played in a while. It'll tell you everything you need to know about that character. So that's really cool. So they did a really good job of fleshing out the world in the first 10 or 15 hours in a way that didn't feel like a slog. But now, all those little conversations that I were having, is the way it's, I don't know, it's like they just ran out of finesse to it. They were just like, yeah, bam, we're just going to keep hammering you with this dialogue that isn't, be way more interesting if it was delivered in a cutscene, but it isn't. It's delivered in these static conversations. And the problem is that this is a good step for the series. I like action. I like action RPGs. If anything, I prefer action RPGs. I'm not one of these purists that wants Final Fantasy to stay turn-based, because I don't think it needs to. Final Fantasy 12 has my favorite combat system of any Final Fantasy game, and that's not turn-based. I know it's kind of like MMO-like kind of, and you can pause it, but that's my favorite combat system in the whole game, in the whole series. Well, apart from Final Fantasy 7 Remake, but that's not a part of the mainline series, I guess. That's kind of a spin-off remake kind of thing. But I think it's just, I have different expectations of this series now. I think the one thing about Final Fantasy 16, it has shown me how much I appreciate Final Fantasy 7 Remake and how good of a game that was. Because yeah, that game at points has some pacing issues where you are doing the same thing, where you're like just walking around the town in Midgar and you're just talking to random NPCs, okay? But it's everything else around that is so good. It has like fun, engaging RPG mechanics behind the scenes where you can level up your materia so that you can build Cloud to be a certain way. And that makes doing random side quests and stuff to get the better gear, even though the majority of them aren't much better than what was in Final Fantasy 16, it still feels like it was worthwhile because you're building towards a character. Like, I wanted Cloud to be like a magic wielder. I wanted Cloud to be like, I rush into people, I have loads of health and I'm really fast. Whereas this just didn't have any of that. And it didn't even have I honestly think that if Final Fantasy 16 had enemies like Devil May Cry, where different enemies forced you to use different strategies, then I would actually love this combat system, because I think it would be great if I went to an enemy and it's like, this enemy blocks on the ground, so you have to figure out a way to get it up into the air. So then I know I have to use my air magic to do something, or I have to use Torgal to launch him up into the air. But there's none of that. Everything is just spam. And then the final third of, or well, I'm into the final quarter of the game now. The pacing is it's just all off, and I've lost interest. I just wanted to talk about this game because I feel like I'm almost doing it a disservice not beating it, but when every single play session over the past couple of days just feels like why am I doing this? Like, why am I sitting here putting an extra 15 hours into this game when it's just not rewarding my time? I can't beat it, and it's a shame. I think Final Fantasy 17, if it was made in the same vein and was fleshed out a bit better, and maybe... See, I think one problem, and I think it was evident in Final Fantasy 15, was everybody hated the linearity of Final Fantasy 13. I actually like Final Fantasy 13. I think it's a good game. The combat system is very good. But Final Fantasy 16 is at its best when it's linear. And I think the series in general, 15 and 16, was trying so hard to not be 13 that it just... They pushed the boat too far. Where if they just kept me funneled in 16 with less side quests that were useless, with less filler that just didn't add anything to the game, and instead just funneled me through these areas, this game is absolutely beautiful, beautiful. And the story is actually pretty good when you get it. But this last third, it's 5 or 6 hours of absolute monotony for 45 minutes of a good and a very good story. The moment that I just got, it hit me in the feels, but just the fact that after that I have to go back and do all this filler bullcrap, I don't know. It's a shame, because I can see that Final Fantasy 16 was going to be... I still like the game. I still think it's a good game. It's way better than Final Fantasy 15. I think Final Fantasy 15 would have gotten a 5 out of 10 from me, and this would have got maybe so far I think this is a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10, but I don't think it goes any higher than that. Maybe pushing a 7.5, but that's at a push. But yeah, I would love to know what you think about Final Fantasy 16. My battery is running low, so I kind of have to finish this video. I just wanted to sit here and talk about this game. It's not scripted. I just wanted to regurgitate my thoughts out there. I'm trying to think of anything I missed. I don't think I did miss much. The main things that were just getting me was the repetitiveness of the combat, the lack of any real RPG system, but I don't think that's an inherent... inherently, I don't think this game not having RPG mechanics is an issue, because if they really wanted it to be an action game, Devil May Cry or Scarlet Nexus does, but Devil May Cry doesn't need RPG mechanics for it to be good. It's just because the combat system is so fun and it's so engaging that you don't care. I know, and that's what Final Fantasy 16 should have been. The combat system should have been so compelling that the lack of RPG mechanics doesn't detract from the game, but it does. So, yes, there's Final Fantasy 16. It's out now, so I'd love to know what you think about it. Once again, thanks again, Square, for the code. I really appreciate that. But I really appreciate everybody watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you all on the next video. Goodbye.